Much for the time being. Here in the studio, I'm joined by the political editor of The Sun, Tom Newton-Dunn, and also Sonia Sodha, who's the chief lead writer of The Observer and also former advisor to Ed Miliband. Tom, do you think Faisal's assessment is correct there, that this was an unambitious Queen's speech?
Yeah, absolutely. It was a very vanilla Queen's speech, very unoffensive and calming sort of affair. One we absolutely won't remember for generations to come. We probably won't even remember it next week. But Faisal's also correct to say there was one giant elephant sitting in the corner of the House of Lords. You might have seen this enormous, great big white elephant sitting right by the Queen as she read out the speech, which was, of course, the EU referendum. And the referendum has really dominated every single bit of content in this. Everything that is controversial has been stripped out. You know, what's not to like about prison reform? What's not to like about a new social care regulator? What's not like about helping the nation's most deprived? And I think it was quite a clever political act in terms of it really went over the heads, if you like, of the warring earlier generations of Tory MPs who, it's really the more senior members of the Tory party who are feuding over the EU quite spectacularly at the moment, you know, the Borises and the Michael Heseltines, to appeal to the 2010-2015 intake, who really have signed up to this one nation, a more caring, compassionate party, who actually do make up the majority of Tory MPs. So if there is a great rebellion post-EU referendum, whichever way it goes, Cameron will be able to appeal to them and say, here's what we're doing, don't worry about the old guard and the EU battles, stick with me and our brand new shiny agenda.
Sonia, is it the case that it is so vanilla that actually it's not going to give the opposition a great deal to complain about?
I mean, I think there is something in that, actually. I think there was a lot of stuff in there. I mean, Cameron obviously has been trying to brief this as a great socially reforming Queen's speech that's going to set his agenda for the next year. But I think not only was there not very much that was controversial in there wasn't actually very much that was new either. So there's a lot of stuff that was actually in the Queen's speech last year. Mm-hmm. There was some stuff in there where you think, does that really need legislation? Does a lifetime ISA need legislation, for example? And while there was some social reform, the prison reform being the main thing, which I think a lot of people would get behind and say is overdue, there wasn't a lot of much more ambitious stuff there around life chances, which you know the Prime Minister says wants to be his legacy. And I think the line of attack for the opposition around this Queen's speech, far from focusing too much on the things that are in there, they're going to be focusing on what's happening to the government's agenda outside of the legislative programme. And I think, you know, if this government wants to be seen as a life chances government, it needs to look very seriously at the austerity agenda and what's happening in areas across the country. We know it's the most disadvantaged, deprived areas that face the biggest cuts to services like educational psychology services, child mental health services, things that mean that schools in the poorest areas are really struggling to do their job. So you can't really craft a life chances speech without addressing some of that really important stuff. And I think that's what the opposition will go hard on.
OK, we've got a little grab of the Queen that we can play you now. Have a listen, and I'm going to ask you what you think she's talking about afterwards.
My government will hold a referendum on membership of the European Union. Proposals will be brought forward for a British Bill of Rights. My ministers will uphold the sovereignty of Parliament and the primacy of the House of Commons.
So do you think this is about sovereignty, or is this about the EU referendum, or is this about the House of Lords?
Well, you need to just examine that language incredibly carefully. The beauty of the Queen's speech is it's one of those sort of legal documents that the likes of us pour through to really break down the exact verbs that are used. So, for example, the Bill of Rights, it is a promise to bring forward proposals, not legislation, which is absolutely crucial. The government promised in its 2015 General Election Manifesto that bringing forward a Bill of Rights and introducing one, and thereby scrapping the Human Rights Act at the same time, would be one of the first things they did. They didn't do it in the first session of Parliament. They're now leaving the window open to not doing it in the second session of Parliament either, which will certainly upset the likes of Ian Duncan-Smith that you just had on. Ditto sovereignty, as we revealed in The Sun this morning, and I should add, there is no sovereignty bill in this speech, and there won't be forevermore now. Yet again, very vanilla language of my ministers will uphold the sovereignty of Parliament. Well, if they're not going to uphold the sovereignty of Parliament, what else are they going to do? It's a bit like upholding the security of the nation. We're rather relieved they're going to do that. So I think it's a lip service, quite frankly, just enough words to appease perhaps the more biddable Tory MPs who wanted this, but absolutely not enough to keep the wolves from the door from certainly the Tory right and the Eurosceptics who will want an awful lot more.
Sonia, you talked about you'd like to have seen more about reducing austerity. And do you think the government's missed a trick in this sense? If this was a Queen's speech that he was trying to put out to please everybody, that there could have been more in the speech on that subject?
I certainly think there could have been more ambition. So, for example, apprenticeships got a mention, but only the briefest of mentions. And we know that apprenticeships are key to life chances for young people who don't go to university. But we know there are lots of problems with the government's expansion. Huge problems with quality. It's mostly apprenticeships for the over 25s that have gone up. So it'd have been great to see something in there on that. We saw something on national citizen service. Great, the government's putting it on a permanent footing. But again, could it have been more ambitious? There are schemes in places like the United States, in France and Germany, which are about young people doing a full year of national citizen service. And that's something that works really well in those countries. So I just got the sense that the government's tried to stay away from anything too controversial, as Tom said, in the run-up to the EU referendum. There's been loads of distractions to the Prime Minister, not just on Europe, but divisions with his own party, backbenchers exploiting the slim majority to demand a number of U-turns from government. So it just feels like, although the Prime Minister was doing his hardest to package this up as a really sort of ambitious reform programme, when you look at the detail, I just think it falls short on that.
Do you think there'll be anything in it to soothe the backbenchers after June the 23rd, Tom?
Well, of course, what this is just a load of slightly meaningless phrases the Queen has to read out from a long bit of paper, which is part of our unwritten constitution. It doesn't actually matter in that the government still can actually not do what the Queen says. The government doesn't actually have to bring forward any of this legislation. We'll all scream blue murder if they don't. But what really matters is when the government publishes each one of these individual 21 bills, then they introduce the measures before Parliament. That is what they are committed to. And without a doubt, there'll be bits and bobs in there that will appease people. I mean, for example, there's one interesting bill called the NHS Overseas Visitors Charging Bill, catchy title, which is all about charging foreigners for access to hospitals and potentially GPs. That will appease the backbenchers. Again, we won't hear too much about it today. Ditto, some of the planning stuff might be quite interesting. There'll be a row there. And the soft drinks industry levy, little cheeky mention in there. That's quite interesting. Actually, we haven't picked up on that yet. That's going to be brought forward.
We knew this was coming, didn't we?
We knew it was coming because the Chancellor announced it in the budget, but he said it was going to happen in 2 years' time. What I don't think we have known yet is he's going to bring forward legislation in this year, which is also very unpopular with some of his right-wing MPs, people like Jacob Rees-Mogg, but very popular with the Labour Party and, the floating middle, dare I say, exactly sort of centrist, soft Labour vote he needs to win the EU referendum.
You probably won't tell us, but I'm going to ask you anyway. What do you think the Sun's front page will be tomorrow on this?
Do you know what? My bet is it probably won't be on the front page. Desperately sorry to disappoint people, but I'm not entirely sure whether... Clearly a decision for the editor, someone far important and powerful than me, but I don't know whether there's enough in here to merit our readers' first page attention.
Sonia, what about The Guardian? Do you think what do you think they will be focusing on from
Well, I work for The Observer, and
yes.
we have the luxury of being a Sunday paper. So
you've got a few days to come up.
You won't have a word about it by Sunday.
They are stable. We'll have moved on by the weekend. So
yeah,
absolutely. But I think what Tom said is right, which is that the politics of this is just not going to go away anytime soon. And in the last time we heard the Queen speak, there was lots in there that the government just wasn't able to get to because of the EU referendum. And I think in the wake of the EU referendum, whatever happens, somebody is going to be trying to patch up the Conservative Party. And I think that is going to continue to distract from this legacy that Cameron says he wants to leave.
Okay. Sonia Sodha and Tom Newton-Dunn, thank you both very much for your discussion, your reaction to the Queen's speech. We're going to be getting more reaction after the break. We're going to be looking at another issue that she talks about, extremism.